please subscribe to the channel, like the video, drop your comments down below, share the videos and clips that you see on YouTube with your mates or anyone that you think is interested in football or Arsenal or United supporter. You never know, it might be something they're interested in watching. And for those you listen on Spotify, Apple, or any of the podcasting platforms, please follow. Give us a 5-star review if you can. All of that stuff helps. We've been seeing a particular uptick in engagement recently, so we really appreciate it. And try and keep that going so we can get better engagement and help the algorithms give other people the opportunity to watch and listen. So yeah, much appreciated. But yeah, let's get into the episode then. Johnson, did you watch the game, or have you seen the highlights?
I saw some highlights, but I haven't been able to properly get into it.
Yeah, I mean, it was at 1 a.m. I think it kicked off late, so it was like 1:20 or 1:15 a.m. in the end over here in the UK in London. God knows what time it was there. It was probably just about the morning time, maybe 9ish or 8ish or something like that in Beijing. So it wasn't the greatest times for us to watch a game. But yeah, the result ended Arsenal 2, Manchester United 1. For weird reasons, they're playing penalties in every game, regardless of the result. And in the penalty shootout, Man U won 4-3. It was an interesting game, at least in the first half, I thought. From a lot of the highlights I saw, the majority of them came from the first half. And listening to and watching some aggregators kind of talk about the game live, it seemed like a lot of action was happening in that first half. And it seemed to be quite an even game in that first half. So both, I think, Ahmad and Mason Mount missed some good chances to put Man U 1 up. And then I think the first 15 minutes, if you were to split them out, was probably more leaning towards Man U in terms of who performed better. And then, Man United did take the lead in, I believe, the 8th or 9th minute. Rashford plays the ball over the top. Rasmus Højlund outmuscles a youngster called Heaven, I believe. Pretty tall and gangly guy, but not that muscly and strong, and he got kind of outmuscled and outpaced. And Højlund scores by nutmegging the goalkeeper to put United 1-0 up. And then it seemed almost like as soon as Højlund, who got injured swiftly after that, and Lenny Yoro, who got injured pretty soon after that, came off, Arsenal started to get back into the game. I think Hannibal Mejbri came on for Højlund, bit of a weird sub in my opinion. And we had no one to hold the ball up, and you guys started, passing the ball around. And to be honest, you looked really good considering it was your second preseason game after the was it Betis that you played a few days before. So it was
Bournemouth.
Bournemouth, that's it. Yeah. So it was pretty good, to be honest, considering it was only your second game. I think it was our third game, so we won one game ahead. And yeah, you equalise, I think, midway through the first half. Jesus scores. Let's be honest, it was definitely offside, but for some reason they're not using linesmen, it seems like, in friendlies. But, no VAR makes sense. And the goal stands. Really nice cross from Nwiri, who I've totally butchered his name, but yeah, top player. We'll call him Ethan from now on. Second half, I didn't see much of that. Looked like it was, all the substitutions like we kind of talked about on last week's show impacted the game, at least from a Man U perspective. It looked like Arsenal, you guys still played pretty good ball. I think majority of your subs came midway through the second half. So you carried on playing the same kind of football in the beginning. And then, Martinelli comes on, I think in like the 73rd, 4th minute or something like that, and scores a really nice goal, cutting in from the left-hand side, twists up our right back. I can't remember his name. I think it was like Scanlon or something like that, youngster, and tucks it away underneath Onana. So you guys get the win 2-1, which I think was pretty fair. You had more of the ball. Makes sense that you guys would win. You obviously, I think, just a better team than us. But then, penalty shootout was super weird. I don't know if you saw some of the highlights about that, but Onana was doing some real Bruce Grobbelaar tactics and like showing players like one side of the goal not getting close to either one of them that he did. I think he did it to Fabio Vieira and Gabriel, right? Who both tucked it away, and he was nowhere near the ball. So he looked like a right. But in the end, he did make one save from Havertz, and then Kirill missed and put one wide to give us the win in the penalty shootout. So, yeah, Johns, I think let's quickly touch on a couple of players because I don't want to. We're not going to do the player ratings that we normally do for a preseason friendly, but I do think there are two or three players that we should have a little quick chat about, and they're all on the Wonder Kid side, so we'll call it Wonder Kid Watch. So you've got Ethan and Wenieri on your side, who I thought had a really good game, but I'll get your opinion. And then we had Toby Collier and I think his name's Harry Amas at left back on the United side. We'll start with Nweri. What did you make of his game, and how excited are you by this youngster?
No, I think he's good. I think he plays, kind of with that young spirit that I think a lot of players tend to have drilled out of them as they get older, which is nice to see. I think he's also kind of mature for his age, obviously, and I think that's a running theme that you'll see across all of these players is that they play as if they're a lot older than they actually are. But yeah, I'm excited by him. I think I'm hoping that he'll get a couple of appearances here and there. I'm not calling for him to be in the team all the time. I do think that we need to obviously prioritize playing our best 11. And unless he can make massive impacts off the bench, I'm not imagining seeing him, a whole lot during the season. But I do think that, if possible, during some of the European fixtures or some of the cup fixtures, it would be good to see him get a run out and see him get some minutes. I do think that obviously he's so young and I think that he's got a long way to go, but I think that he's got a lot of potential so far from what I've seen to be a really good player for us. And he's obviously got now good players to learn from. And I think that's one of the important things that we need to remember about this team is that, yes, buying and selling in the transfer window is one way to build a good team, but you'll see from like the best players that we've got or the best player that we've got, in my opinion, with Saka, we've also got to grow some of our own players too. And not in that Man City way where we're just doing it to sell them afterwards and get profit from it. I would actually like to see some of these players actually come into our squad. And, I think you've seen in a lot of really good teams over the years that a large core of their best players are homegrown. So yeah, I'm excited by him, but I don't want to get ahead of myself. I'm not going to be like one of those Arsenal fans on Twitter that saying he's the next Yamal or he's the next this or he's the next that. Like, he's a good player. He's young. He's going to need time. He's going to need minutes, and he's going to need coaching and mentoring from the rest of the team.
Yeah, no, I mean, I was really impressed, man. I know he's come off the bench, I think, a few times in different games in the first team, and he's obviously, I think, played in a few preseason games last year. But this is my first time, obviously, seeing him in a game of this kind. I know it's not magnitude because it's just a preseason friendly, but in a game where I'm actually paying attention to it properly, and he looked really tidy, man. He looks like he's I don't think he's got like his proper man body yet to take the like week in week out Premier League, but I think he was definitely, he was sticking his foot in there and getting involved, and he certainly didn't look physically overawed coming up against Casemiro or Collier, who's quite a big lad as well. And then he was really neat on the ball, and he just looked quite mature. I think you used the word mature just now, and he did look quite mature. He didn't look like a kid coming up from youth football. He looked like he kind of felt like he belonged, which is it's a great start. And you kind of touched on a question I was going to ask you actually. Like, a lot of Arsenal fans, and you kind of mentioned some that are getting a bit ahead of themselves maybe, or getting a bit gassed about his performances. And just I was going to ask you how much you think he should feature this season, because I've heard some people say he should get at least, I don't know, 15 starts this season, or I don't know, 10 full games, etc. I've heard some people use those kind of numbers to kind of give him as an objective for the season. Do you think? I mean, it sounds like from what you've said, you're willing to go even slower than that and kind of just drip feed him in off the bench in kind of Carabao Cup or European dead rubbers and stuff like that. Is that what you're saying? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it depends on the team. It depends on what's happening with the injury situation. It depends on a lot of things, right? Like, of course, if our team is full strength, no injuries, then he's probably going to be third choice to get into that 10 spot behind Odegaard and maybe Fabio Vieira. So from my point of view, like, yes, I'd like to see him get minutes, but it depends really on the situation. And if I've got to sacrifice getting something out of next season and not playing him, I'm unfortunately going to have to go for that one. So that's why I'm saying cup games, maybe some European fixtures, depending on what's happening in the groups. They could be good, good opportunities for him to show something, right? And good opportunities for him for Odegaard to get a bit of a break. Because one thing that we know from the last couple of years is we've been playing the same players over and over again, right? Saka's a great example. Odegaard's a good example too. And, with Odegaard particularly, that he's had injuries in his past, right? He's not been fully clean record in terms of his kind of his health. So, it depends on that, and it depends on what we do in the transfer market, right? Like if we go and get, like a Fabian Ruiz or some of the people that we might talk about a little bit later that can play maybe the 8 role and also step into the 10 role, then maybe he goes further down the pecking order. But obviously from the growth perspective, development perspective, I'd like to see him get minutes. I'd like to see him get starts. But I'm not going to call for him to get 15 starts because that's a lot of games, man. That means that he's going to be trusted over Odegaard or maybe, I don't know, over whoever's going to be playing that 8 position a lot more frequently than I would hope, right? It's a lot of risk to put on a 17-year-old to come into a team that, again, I'm hoping will win the Premier League next season, right? So I get what people are saying about him, and obviously they want to grow their youth, but he's 17, man. Like, he's got a couple more years. We don't have to throw him in this season and try and get him loads of games. Because also another good thing is, or another thing to think about is, do we want him to be getting injuries? Do we want to overload him with, as you say, he's not fully developed physically, throwing him into Premier League, which is arguably one of the most physical leagues in the world? So, I can see both sides of it, but if it's up to me, if we're all fit and we've got who we need to get and, we're successful in the transfer window, I imagine just some cup games and some substitutions every now and then, maybe in the 70th, 80th minute, but not more than that unless something bad happens.
Yeah, I think that's. I think that's probably the most sensible approach. I think some Arsenal fans are looking at him as maybe he's going to be able to jump ahead of a Vieira, which, to be honest, I don't think is as crazy of a shout as it might seem. I'm not going to downplay Vieira and act like he's absolutely rubbish. I think he gets a bit of a hard rap because he's been quite heavily injured. I feel like when he has played, especially last season, he looked okay. First season, he didn't look good. But, you've got to give people a bit of time to, bed in. He was coming in from Portugal. He was young himself. So I think, I would give Vieira a bit more space to grow. But I do think that's kind of the battle that a lot of Arsenal fans are leaning more towards him over Vieira, especially, for the fans who don't really rate Vieira at all. Right, I guess it's a bit of a tap in. But I think you've got to probably start cautious and then scale up your expectations depending on how he goes. I think a lot of people had that approach with Kobe last season, even though there were a lot of United fans that were getting super gassed in pre-season because we were also playing him a lot, and he was playing really well, and people were saying Kobe's the future and all this kind of stuff, and then the injury kind of derailed all of that. I guess was a bit of a reminder to everyone that we need to chill out a bit. But as soon as he came into the team, you saw the expectations have grown massively now. And that's purely down to his performances. So I don't think Ethan's. It's impossible for Ethan to do something similar. But yeah, I think you've just got to play it by ear really, and see how it goes. I would definitely say he was probably the best performing youngster on the pitch. But the other two on the United side was Toby Collier in midfield, who we'll start with now, who looks like a unit, man. I think he's like 19 or he's a bit older than Ethan and Amas, who we'll talk about in a minute. But he's tall, he's pretty rangy, but he looks a bit more developed from the physical standpoint. He looks like he's able to play proper football, and he covers ground, man. So even though I don't think he was like he doesn't look like some generational talent from what I've seen so far, right? Which might be harsh to say. He looked good, and he looked like he can definitely be useful. And it looks like we could use that profile of player in our midfield 100%. He was getting stuck in. He was winning the ball high. He was pressing. He was covering loads of ground. Both him and Mount, bless them, they had their hands full because Casemiro was doing his usual madness, giving the ball away loads and kind of not looking the greatest from an on the ball perspective. But I thought he looked really handy, man, and I feel like it's an interesting decision if we go and get a Ugarte or someone like that who we've been linked with heavily across the year. Even though I'm not saying don't get him, by the way, I still think it would make much more sense to get someone like that in that position. We definitely have to get rid of a couple of midfielders, because if we're planning to play Kobe, who else have we got in midfield? I guess Kobe. If we get Ugarte in, and then you've obviously got Collier still knocking around, getting minutes. Mount, who looks like he's going to be put in midfield now. You've also got Bruno, and then it's going to be something depending on. It looks like Casemiro's move is not going to happen now. You're gonna have to sell Ericsson. You're gonna have to sell McTominay and or Casemiro to fit all of those players in, right? But I would feel very comfortable if he was our third or fourth rotational midfielder. From what I've seen of him so far, I think you'll have to be patient because he'll give the ball away. Like, that's very obvious. Like in the style that we're looking to play, a youngster shielding in front of the defense, getting the ball on the half turn or with his back to goal, he's going to get his pocket picked for sure a few times at least, right? He's not going to have that nous yet. But I'm happy with him, man. I thought he looked decent, and I like I said, I'd be totally comfortable with him being a rotational midfielder. What did you make of his performance, John? Do you think do you echo what I'm saying, or do you think he's someone that we should maybe flog?
No, he looks handy, but I mean, he's 20 years old, so I'd expect that he'd be closer to being able to get into your team, right? And I mean, he's older than Kobe, so I think that he should get a chance. He looks like he's not. I mean, he looks like he's got potential. Obviously, he hasn't had a whole lot of first team football, but I think he came from Brighton and he got some decent football at Brighton. So I think if you don't end up with an Ugarte or a real destroyer defensive midfielder, I'd have no problems with you putting him in midfield. I think you've got, you're not going to be able to fix all of your problems in one transfer window. I think it's been very clear with all of these Project S type things that you can never fix everything in 1 year, especially depending on your starting point where, in your case particularly, there's a lot of players that you need to get rid of and a lot of positions that you need to really get up to speed. And I think in that interim before, you can get everything sorted out in maybe 2, 3, 4 transfer windows, you're going to need to trust some players to do something, to put in a shift and to do something in the meantime. And I don't see why you wouldn't want to do that with Toby Collier, because let's be honest, he's got a lot of upside. If it goes badly, then you just say he's 20 years old. He's never really played in our first team before. That's kind of what we expect. And I can't see him being any worse than Casemiro last season. So from that point of view, it's only upside, because if he goes out there and does really well, then you've got maybe an Adam Wharton on your hands. You've got like another player that you can say, okay, next to Kobe, here's our new player. And maybe we just need to go and get maybe an experienced defensive midfielder that will kind of come in for him every now and then and will kind of coach him where he needs to go and where he, how he needs to develop. But if you don't end up getting Ugarte, I think you're still in a great position. And I'd like to see him be paired up next to Kobe. I think it's a great opportunity for young players in the stage that Man United are in right now. And I don't see why not, like why you wouldn't put some trust into that academy, because, as much as Man United have been poor infrastructure-wise over the last few years, you can still churn out some pretty good players. Maybe they haven't been favoured recently, like, Hannibal and all these like that didn't get necessarily the best chance. And when they did, they were in like a really toxic team. You can still crank out some good players. So I don't see why he shouldn't get a chance. As you say, I think he looks physically, he looks like he's 20 years old and he looks like he's even ahead of that in terms of his physicality. So that bodes well for the Premier League. So, hats off to him. He looks good. If he can just learn all the good things about Casemiro and just forget all the crap that he sees from Casemiro, then he could turn into a really good player.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think he's got a lot of the attributes already. And then he just needs to gain the experience and then be put under the pressure to see whether or not he can, play for a Man United in the Premier League. I think that's the question marks that you've got against him, but we won't know unless you put him in there. And I agree completely, bro. I think I wouldn't say I would be happy if we didn't get an Ugarte and we just went in with Collier. But if we had Collier involved in the rotation alongside an Ugarte or something like that, then I would be more than happy with him as a squad player, and I would feel very much comfortable if he came in certain games. Or he started, if Ugarte was injured or something like that, I wouldn't, be holding my breath thinking that we're in deep doo-doo. But I guess time will tell with that. And the other young player on the United side, but sorry, before we get into that, that's a good point, yeah? Because I think a lot of people are going, oh, both on the Arsenal and United side, because we have a history of bringing, quite a lot of young players through. Our academies are, at the top end of the Premier League's academies in terms of producing top talent. Both of our clubs are, I guess, yearning for that, next youngster. You've obviously had Saka, you've had Smith Rowe now, who's sadly going to be leaving, but you've had some recently, right? We've had Kobe, Garnacho. We kind of want that to continue, but I think what you said is really, really true and important to emphasize. We're at the stage, Man United are at the stage where it's a good opportunity for youngsters to come in, because we don't have. It's not possible for us to buy and sell and solve all of our gaps in our squad through the transfer market immediately. So that opens up opportunities for a Kobe to come through, for a Garnacho to come through, and now potentially for a Collier and an Amas to come through. But at your stage, at Arsenal stage, you're fighting for the league now, all right? When Saka and Smith Rowe and Nelson and these guys came through, you were at the stage we were at. You were fighting for top four. You were going through a rebuild. Arteta was new in. You were trying to flog aging stars and rip up their contracts, and you couldn't solve all of your problems in the transfer market. So it gave them an opportunity, and you thank God for that, because Saka wouldn't have come about probably if you were in a different stage. So that's important to remember. So it's much more difficult for an Ethan and Weary to come through and make it in your first team than it is for a Collier or an Amas, because you don't have those spots necessarily available unless a couple of your players that you've bought for 30, 40 million absolutely tank, right? And that's what you're relying on, basically. You're relying on, Vieira or someone like that to absolutely flop for him to even get a chance. So it's horses for courses, and you have to factor that in when you're kind of creating an expectation for a youngster to come through. It ain't easy, as old Saeed says. Let's get on to the last player quickly before we touch on a couple of final points on the game. Harry Amas. You know what? He's the only United player that, alongside Onana, I think, that played the full 90. His first half, he looked really good. He was, covering ground, man. He was up and down that left-hand side. He was really nice on the ball. And he looks a lot like a Luke Shaw regen, also in his, stature. He's quite, stocky and low centre of gravity and stuff like that. But I really liked him, man. And again, the same thing applies to Toby Collier. Considering the amount of injuries we had focused on the left-back area, right? Luke Shaw's made of glass. Malacia, people were scared that he was, dead, or unliving, or whatever they say on TikTok. You might have to blank that one out if we want to get traction. I would keep him around. We flogged that Alvaro Fernandez or whatever we had, a good youngster that we had to Benfica that I was quite upset about. We need to have a youngster around, so, who doesn't have the expectation to play all the time, but he may be thrust in there if our left backs aren't fit, which I think we can all admit now. The two left backs we currently have on the books are not very trustworthy, and they don't fill me with confidence when it comes to fitness. So, I'll be more than happy to keep him and not even go into the transfer market on the left-hand side, and focus on other areas if we've got Harry Amas. From what I've seen, he looked really handy, man. What did you make of him quickly, Johns, before we move on?
No, I think he's good, but I think again he fits into that Nwiri age
He's very young,
bracket
isn't
of
he?
he's 17, and that's where I'm a little worried, because knowing Luke Shaw, if he does get injured, he gets injured for a long time, and then you've got to rely on a 17-year-old, and that's all well and good if the rest of your defense and midfield that would kind of be around him and protect him are really good and kind of can coach him through it, right? Like a Rico Lewis kind of situation. But I think at 17, if there's not a lot of stability around him, and let's say Luke Shaw does go and get injured for a long amount of time, I feel like that's maybe a little bit too far for him, and you could end up going the other way where you kind of overplay him, smash his confidence into the ground because you're not playing so well, or whatever else happens, and then you've kind of not lost a player, but you've got to build him back up again in the future to make him back to what he could have been or what his potential says that he should be. So that's the one where I'm a little bit less certain. I feel like, I know it sounds harsh, but ideally you'd get rid of Luke Shaw just because of how injury prone he is, even though he's a really, really good player and on his day is probably one of the best left backs in the world. I just think that if, and the fact that you don't have like a proper backup for him makes it really uncertain. So like you could go and get like a younger, more solid left back and let Collier come in, or not Collier, sorry, Amas come in every now and then when that player needs a break. But with Luke Shaw, there's just too high of a probability that if you do start with Amas as your second choice, that he's going to have to play the whole season, or he's going to have to play a large chunk of it. So that's the part where I'm a little bit worried about him. But I think he looks really good. He's a Watford boy. Come on, which is good to see. Good to see some Watford, some Hornets getting in there. But I just think, I think it's a bit risky. So like another alternative could be go and get like a centre back that can also play left back, kind of like a Calafiori type of thing. Whether it's De Ligt or somebody else, try and buy a centre back that can also play a little bit of left back if Luke Shaw does go and get injured, because obviously in the centre back position you're maybe a little bit stronger depending on who you kind of sell now. So yeah, that overall he looks really good, but he's just in that age bracket where it's maybe a little too young to really trust with like first team starting every match. He does look physically like he could deal with it, but just the age, man, I can't overlook the fact that he's only 17.
Yeah, I mean, I would definitely not play him week in, week out. I think he would definitely be like a third choice left back, most likely fourth, really, because I think obviously Dalot can play left and right back. If we get a Mazraoui in, who it looks very much likely that we will, and we'll talk about that in a bit, he can cover left and right back. So most likely, if we get a continuation of all the injuries at left back, as long as our right back options stay fit, most likely we will do what we did last season, which was stick Dalot left back or right back and put the other
that's
right back.
That protects him. I just don't want him to be second choice and have to being second choice to Luke Shaw is basically like being first choice a lot of the time. So
that's like being the AB choice, which
exactly.
is a bit dodgy. But I mean, I know a lot of United fans have completely written off Malacia. I haven't. I think you have to be patient with him, but I'm hopeful that if there's one positive that we can get out of the season from that perspective is trying to rehabilitate him and get him minutes, because I wasn't on the train that he's rubbish. I thought he had a decent first season. I thought he had loads of standout games where he was really good. Especially against Liverpool, he locked up Salah once, and he had a really good game with Saka, I think, in one of the United Arsenal fixtures. So I think I wouldn't be ruling him out completely. And if we do have that, then I would also feel quite comfortable with Malacia from what I've seen of him. And then either of the right backs covering, and then Amas as a third choice if Shaw's still in and out of injury all the time. So, but yeah, definitely be cautious. I think he should be treated in a similar way to Ethan, in that if he does have games, it's got to be blooding him in slowly and very carefully. But all right, let's wrap up the last few bits on the game then, Jonts. I mean, I feel like the result 2-1 was fair. Like, I feel like you guys had more of the ball. I think close to 60% possession of the ball. You didn't have loads of chances necessarily. I think actually we probably had more chances in the first half to score a couple of goals than you guys did. But I think your overall play was better than us, and you looked a lot more fluent on the ball. And I think if 2-1 is a fair result. What did you think though?
Yeah, I think it was fair. Maybe erring on the side of a draw probably was most fair overall. Just the fact that the goal was a mile offside. But I think we had more possession, but I don't think that really. I've said it many times before. Possession for the sake of possession is not a good thing in my opinion, right? Like it's slightly positive, but not majorly positive, unless it turns into more chances, more opportunities for you to score. And overall, it didn't really. So it's a slight positive, but not a major positive. So from that point of view, I'd possibly edge it and say, yeah, we maybe deserve to win, but I could also easily see that ends in a draw and everyone's kind of happy with whatever happened. So kind of in the middle of the two, of a draw and an Arsenal win.
Yeah, I'd agree with you. It's funny though. You see, I've seen some other content creators talk about the game afterwards and give their analysis, and we get. I think football. A lot of people, and I agree with them when they talk about kind of the individual flair and stuff has been taken out the game, and it's the game is gone, etc. Which I think is probably a bit too far, but the general sentiment I understand. But the analysis of this friendly has also just reiterated that, because so many people were like Arsenal are levels above, so much better. Man United are rubbish. They absolutely battered them. Blah blah blah. And I look at the highlights that I saw. I look at the aggregators on both sides. Try and find the level-headed ones, not the over the top fanboy ones. And I think the analysis that you gave is probably the overriding opinion that I see in all of these commentators. But in some of these content creators, it smacks of we're really giving people extra points, style points, for possession, like you said, possession for possession's sake. And I do think you guys knocked the ball better. You look definitely like a more mature team, like a team that's spent more time with each other. But I feel like these days everyone's scoring fights, in a boxing way, and it's all style points for if if you have the ball more, and there's no room for just, like, let's be honest, more chances. If you look at the chance creation point, United had more shots and more shots on target. So does that count at any point or not, or is it just having the ball more counts? We're doing pet ball for every result. So yeah, it kind of stinks from that perspective. But I agree with you. I think probably Arsenal just about edge it, or maybe a draw based on I think how the game really went, and not just looking at who had the ball more. The last point I'll make is absolute big blow for United if Højlund and Euro are out for a substantial amount of time. I would even say even if they're out for the rest of pre-season, because especially on the Euro side, if he's out for the rest of pre-season, which there's some rumours coming out that he might be out for 6 to 8 weeks, that stinks, because even though I know Lisandro Martinez is not even there, and that is what a lot of people have been predicting the combination will be, right? If we don't sign another defender, just not getting him the time to get on the training field and play preseason games with his teammates. And you saw some loose touches from him in this game, right? He got his pocket picked in like the first minute by Jesus. He did a really good recovery. It was a bit Gahey like in the Euros, where he made a bit of a blunder and then saved it at the end. But he looked a bit like he was a bit confused, or he didn't quite build a relationship with Maguire, who I think had a pretty stinky game, if I'm honest. I think Jesus just twisted him up like a pretzel, to be honest. But I think it's so important for him to play. So if him and Højlund, less so Højlund, but both, I would say, they're both out for the rest of pre-season or miss any Premier League games, boy, that's really, really sad. And I'll be bitterly disappointed if that's the case.
Yeah.
What did you make? I mean, it's a pretty obvious one, right? I can't imagine you were going to say no. It's okay to get injured.
No, yeah. If I'm a Man United fan, I'm a bit worried. I do agree. Like, obviously, he looked a bit shakier. But I'm going to be honest with you. If you've never played against Gabby Jesus before, you're going to look shaky. He's a very different type of striker to come up against, and I'd say he's almost one of a kind in this day and age, right? Like, I don't see too many other strikers that are like him. He's such a nuisance, and you've got to just get the ball away from you as quickly as possible so that he doesn't have the opportunity to nick it off you or push you or do this or do that. And I think you're bound to see a lot of centre backs come up against Gabby Jesus for the first time and make a couple of mistakes like that, because Gabby Jesus, everyone makes fun of him like he's not a goal scoring striker, and that's fair enough. But you know what he is? He's a massive pain in the arse striker, right? He will make your life a living hell, even if he can't necessarily put away his own chances. So I think that is a blow. And then I think obviously the Højlund one too. I think Højlund one is less so of a blow just because you've seen him. He's a known quantity, he's a known entity to you. You know what he can do when he gets on the ball. You know what he can do when he's linked up with certain players. And right now you don't necessarily have like a right winger, left winger that you're trying to test out a relationship with. So Højlund's less of a blow, but still a blow, of course, because you want as many of your players available as possible to really gel together before you get into the Premier League. But the Euro one is real disappointing because You want to give him some time to really get used to it, especially in a defense. A defense more so than anything else. You need
Yeah,
time just to bed in together with other players. And if you don't get that time, you can sometimes be on the wrong wavelength, a different wavelength when it comes time when games are a lot more important, and then you start getting into some issues where you lose or you commit some mistakes because you're just not on the same wavelength. So more so for a centre back than anyone, I think that is a bit of a blow.
definitely, man. I 100% agree. You need continuity in defense, and it's even just training, right? Even if he wasn't playing loads of games, but he was just training with Maguire, training with Evans, training with some of these guys that he might have to cover for in the season. And you could tell on the pitch in that 20 minutes or whatever he was on the pitch, you could tell him and Maguire weren't on the same wavelength. And I think a lot of partners that have to get used to playing with Harry Maguire need some time to acclimatise, because he's not your traditional centre back, and I don't think he'll be a centre back that Euros played with while he was at Lille. Some of his partners, I can't think they're very Maguire like. You know what I mean? They're probably a bit more Leacher like, or probably even more calmer versions of that. So having someone who's plays like Maguire, who you're going to have to sweep up for, because he can't, he can't track back or deal with balls over the top. Yoro's got his hands full, and he didn't look like he could cope with it. But yeah, it's a blow, man. Let's hope they're not serious injuries, and we get to see them when the Premier League kicks off in a couple of weeks' time. All right, let's wrap up that then. Arsenal get the win 2-1 in the pre-season social media derby. But yeah, getting excited for the season now after seeing our teams play against each other as well. It's kind of like a bit of a reminder that the season's coming back soon, and it's exciting times. But